What does it take for enough to actually feel like enough? She wipes the counter again. It was already clean. She checks the light for a streak nobody else would see before she lets herself sit down with her coffee. Not because it's dirty, because sitting down without checking first has never once felt like an option. Somewhere along the way, a habit that began as care started keeping a ledger. Not a real one, no paper, no spreadsheet, but it functions like one. A running tally kept somewhere behind the ribs, never reset to zero. Nobody remembers opening the account. It simply existed one day, already mid-entry. Ask her if she's disciplined and she'll say yes, almost embarrassed by how easily the word applies. Ask her if she's kind to herself and she'll pause, not because she doesn't know the answer, but because she's never asked the question in that order. So, if the counter were finally clean enough, really finished, would it feel like relief? Or would something else step in right away, insisting it wasn't quite spotless yet? She sits down. The coffee is still warm. Something in her chest hasn't unclenched, a small, tight pull, like a cord drawn one notch too far and left there. And she couldn't tell you when that started, only that it did. There's a particular kind of pride that arrives uninvited, the kind that shows up when she realizes she skipped lunch again, and for half a second feels accomplished before feeling anything else. That half second is worth pausing on. This pride arrived before thought caught up with it. Only after did the second feeling show up behind it, small, cold. Why did that feel like a win? This is how the shift happens, quietly. Discipline begins as self-respect, a way of saying, I take myself seriously. But respect and hostility can share the exact same behaviors for years before anyone notices they've swapped places. Nobody intervenes on a person who skips lunch to finish the work. At home, she doesn't take the standard off either. Not with friends, not in the mirror, not in the one room where no one else has ever stood. There's a version of her that exists only for other people, warm, generous, and a version that shows up the second she's alone, still fully dressed in the same internal uniform. Nobody's watching. She keeps it on anyway. Still that same cord, pulled one notch tighter now. There's a voice underneath all of this that doesn't sound cruel. That's the trick. It sounds like honesty. You know you could have done more, flat, reasonable, the tone you'd use to point out the weather. Honesty is supposed to update when it meets new information. Does this voice ever update? She tries to remember a single time it has. She can't. But she also hasn't asked where the voice first learned to talk that way. There's a moment, most nights, when her jaw unclenches, and she realizes, only then, that it had been clenched all day. The body keeps its own records, separate from the ones she's aware of. A held breath, shoulders migrating toward the ears, that same cord pulled without her hand on it. None of it reaches language. It doesn't need to. Here's what doesn't fit the story she tells about herself. She calls all this control, evidence that she's the one steering. But control implies a driver, and a driver can slow down. What she has instead is a system that runs regardless of her preference, one that reads her exhaustion as proof it's still needed. Picture a trainer at the edge of the room, not shouting, just present. Still there after the session ends, still there at dinner, still there in the 15 minutes before sleep that were supposed to belong to no one but her. She works harder, in part, because some old fear insists she isn't enough as she is. So she produces more evidence. And the fear doesn't quiet down. It reads the extra effort as proof it was right to demand it. Outworking insecurity doesn't starve it, it feeds it. She unclenches her jaw again, an hour later, without noticing she'd clenched it. The trainer hasn't said a word tonight. She's never actually stopped long enough to find out if he would.
There's an object in a drawer somewhere, a small trophy, a report card, a row of gold stars that once meant something simple. You did enough today. She hasn't looked at it in years. The shape of it still runs underneath everything. Back then, the equation was clean. Do the thing, get the mark. Feel the warmth that followed. Nobody explained that love would now be conditional on output. It never needed explaining. A child doesn't question the terms, she just learns them. And the lesson that gets absorbed isn't, I am loved, it's, I am loved when. Decades pass. The report card is gone, and still, some part of her keeps running the old equation on a schedule nobody renewed. The mark isn't a grade anymore. It's a task list, a body, a calendar. But the mechanism is identical. Perform, then maybe. Somewhere, a gate was installed, not maliciously, installed early enough that it now feels like the ground itself. And the strange design of this gate is that the key was left on the inside. She simply never tried the lock, because trying it would mean testing whether the fear underneath was ever true. That cord in her chest, still pulled tight, still waiting to see if it's allowed to loosen. She still hasn't tried the lock. Not tonight either. But she's looked at the gate longer than she has before. There's a version of this story that ends with her throwing the whip away. That's not what happens. What happens is smaller. She simply sees it, not as a villain. She sees it the way you might finally see a tool you've held so long your hand forgot it was holding anything. A whip she picked up herself a long time ago for a reason that made sense at the time. Seeing it doesn't loosen the grip on the handle. Old tools don't loosen just because you recognize them. But something shifts anyway, quietly, the way weather shifts before anyone names it. Morning again. The phone is on the nightstand where it landed the night before. She doesn't reach for it right away. There's a pause there, the length of a single breath, where the old reflex rises, the one that wants to check the number before deciding whether today has been earned yet. The ledger is still there. It doesn't close just because someone finally sees the ink. But this morning, for one breath, she doesn't open it. She lets it sit, the way you might let a letter sit unread, not because you'll never read it, but because you've noticed you're allowed to choose the moment. The cord in her chest, still there, a little looser than yesterday, not gone. Maybe she opens the ledger in 10 minutes. That's not really the point. So maybe the question isn't how to become someone who never picks the whip back up. Maybe it's simpler and harder. What would the effort even look like? The reaching, the trying, the wanting to do well, if it were no longer trying to prove anything at all?